The lights in the recreation room of the battleship Nexus Prime cast a warm glow over the mixed group of alien soldiers. They sat around a large metal table, their drinks half empty, and their voices loud with celebration. The battle against the Zephyrian Raiders had ended 3 hours ago. Victory always tasted sweet. Crick stretched all 4 of his arms above his head and let out a satisfied grunt. The Zentarian warrior was built like a tank, with thick purple skin and muscles that could crush steel. His species was known throughout the galaxy for their strength and fighting ability. Tonight, he felt particularly proud of his performance in battle. "Another easy victory," Crick said, taking a long drink from his cup. "Those raiders never stood a chance against us." Vela nodded in agreement. Her crystalline body caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the walls. The court was beautiful in an alien way. With her transparent skin and the soft musical sound her voice made when she spoke, her people were known for their perfect memory and logical thinking. "Humans did well enough," she said, her voice making a gentle, chiming sound. "They followed orders and stayed out of the way during the real fighting." Thane laughed, showing rows of sharp teeth. The reptilian sword was covered in green scales that gleamed under the lights. His people were natural predators, fast and deadly in combat. He had personally taken down 6 enemy soldiers during the battle. "The humans always do what they are told," Thane said. "They are good at following orders. I will give them that. But they lack the natural fighting spirit of real warriors." The 3 aliens had fought together for 2 years now. They had seen action on 12 different worlds and never lost a battle. They made a good team, with Crix providing raw strength, Vela offering tactical analysis, and Thane bringing speed and killing instinct. "Speaking of humans," Crix said, looking around the room, "where are they tonight?" "Usually Jake Morrison and Lisa Rodriguez join us for drinks after a victory. Probably telling each other stories about their great ancestors," Vela replied with amusement in her musical voice. "I overheard them yesterday talking about some ancient human warrior named Achilles. They spoke of him like he was real." Crix burst into laughter, his forearms slapping the table. "Oh yes, I have heard these human stories. They love to talk about their heroes, single warriors who could defeat entire armies. It is quite amusing." Thane leaned forward with interest. His yellow eyes gleamed in the light. "Tell us more about these human myths. I enjoy a good joke." "Well," Crix began, settling back in his chair.
"Ow!"
"Humans have many stories about individual soldiers performing impossible feats. They tell tales of warriors who could fight hundreds of enemies alone and win. They call these warriors heroes. Velas." Crystalline forms sparkled with what looked like laughter. "I have heard similar stories. They speak of someone called Leonidas who held off an entire army with just 300 soldiers. Completely impossible, of course." Gackley Crix agreed. "Their entertainment media is filled with these fantasies. Lone warriors defeating entire armies, single soldiers saving entire planets. They actually seem to believe these stories could be real." Thane shook his scaly head. "How can an intelligent species believe such nonsense? Action means nothing. Victory comes from superior numbers, better technology, and tactical planning. That is what makes humans so interesting," Vela said. "They are weak compared to most species in the Coalition. They have no natural armor like you, Thane. They cannot regenerate lost limbs. They lack the multiple arms and enhanced strength. Of Zentarians like Crix, yet they seem to believe they are destined for greatness." Crix nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, exactly. I think they create these hero stories to make themselves feel better about being so physically weak. It is a psychological compensation mechanism. I have noticed this too," Thane added. "Human soldiers often speak of their military history with what seems like religious reverence. They mention names like Audie Murphy and York, as if these individuals were gods rather than ordinary soldiers." Vela accessed her memory banks, her crystalline body glowing slightly as she processed information. "I have studied human military records. They have many awards for individual bravery, including something called the Medal of Honor. They treat recipients of this award with almost mystical respect." "See what I mean?" Crix said, spreading all 4 arms wide. "They focus on individual achievement rather than unit cohesion and tactical superiority." It shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how modern warfare actually works. The three aliens continued their discussion, growing more animated as the alcohol affected their systems. Other soldiers from various species sat at nearby tables, some listening to the conversation with amusement. "The funniest part," Thane said, his forked tongue flicking out as he spoke, "is how they portray these heroes in their entertainment. Always outnumbered, always facing impossible odds, yet somehow always winning through sheer determination and fighting spirit." "I saw one of their movies last week," Crix admitted. "It was about a human soldier named Rambo who single-handedly defeated an entire army. The humans watching it seemed to take it seriously, as if such a thing could actually happen." Vela made a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, which was how her species expressed amusement. "They have convinced themselves that humans are special among the galactic community, that their species has some unique quality that allows them to achieve the impossible. When the reality," Thane said, taking another drink, "is that they are support troops at best, useful for logistics, communications, and basic infantry work, but hardly the super warriors their stories suggest." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Zara, a tall blue-skinned Altarian with silver hair and large black eyes. Her species was known for their intelligence and ability to process vast amounts of information quickly. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, already pulling up a chair. "I could not help but overhear your discussion about human mythology." "Please, sit," Crix said, making room at the table. "We were just discussing how amusing human hero stories are." Zara settled into her chair and ordered a drink from the service robot. "As an intelligence officer, I have access to detailed reports on human military doctrine. You would be amazed at how their strategic planning still incorporates these mythological concepts." "What do you mean?" Vela asked, her crystalline form leaning forward with interest. "Human generals actually plan operations around the assumption that individual soldiers will perform beyond normal parameters," Zara explained. "They build tactical plans that depend on what they call heroic actions. It is completely irrational. From a military science perspective," Thane shook his head in disbelief. "That sounds like a recipe for disaster. How do they win any battles with such unrealistic expectations?" "They usually do not lead major operations," Zara replied. "The coalition command structure places humans in support roles for good reason. When they do lead, they often take unnecessary risks based on these hero fantasies." The group continued their discussion for another hour, with each alien sharing stories and observations about human behavior they found amusing or puzzling. The recreation room grew more crowded as other soldiers finished their duties and joined the celebration. None of them noticed the older human sitting alone in a corner booth, quietly nursing his drink and listening to every word they said. Colonel Frank Davis had been in the room for the entire conversation, but the aliens had not paid attention to him. He was just another human, after all, and therefore not particularly important or interesting. Davis was a man in his 50s, with gray hair and a weathered face marked by old scars. He wore the simple, off-duty uniform of a coalition officer, with few visible decorations or rank insignia. To the casual observer, he looked like exactly what the aliens expected from a human soldier: ordinary, unremarkable, and probably assigned to some minor support role. As the alien soldiers continued their mockery of human myths and legends, Colonel Davis sat in silence, occasionally sipping his drink and watching their animated discussion with calm, patient eyes. The alcohol was starting to affect the alien soldiers more strongly now. Their voices grew louder, and their laughter more frequent as they continued to discuss human mythology. The recreation room had filled with more coalition soldiers from various species, all enjoying the celebration of their recent victory. Crix suddenly stood up on his chair, swaying slightly as he used all four arms to gesture dramatically. "Watch this," he announced to the group. "I will show you how humans tell their hero stories." The Zentarian warrior cleared his throat and puffed out his chest, trying to look serious and noble. "I am brave human soldier," he said in a mock-heroic voice, speaking with an exaggerated accent. "I face impossible odds with only my pure heart and fighting spirit. The enemy has thousands of soldiers, but I have determination." The other aliens burst into laughter as Crix continued his performance. He struck various poses that he imagined looked heroic, standing with his hands on his hips and staring off into the distance. "I will not surrender," Crix continued, his voice getting more dramatic. "For I fight not just for myself, but for freedom and justice and all the innocent people who depend on me. One human is worth 1,000 enemies." Vila's crystalline body sparkled with amusement, creating rainbow patterns on the walls as she laughed. "That is perfect, Crix. You sound just like the humans in their entertainment programs." Thane joined in the mockery, standing up and placing one clawed hand over his heart. "Do not forget the part where they talk about honor and duty," he said, copying Crix's exaggerated tone. "We must fight because it is the right thing to do, even if we all die. Death before dishonor." The reptilian warrior made a show of wiping away a fake tear. "We must never forget our fallen comrades who gave their lives so that others might live. Their sacrifice makes us stronger." More aliens at nearby tables had started watching the performance, and many were laughing at the theatrical display. Some began calling out suggestions for other human sayings and behaviors they had observed. "Tell them about the speeches," shouted a Veltar soldier from across the room. His species looked like large insects with multiple legs and compound eyes. Humans love to give inspiring speeches before battles. Crix nodded enthusiastically and climbed onto the table itself, spreading his forearms wide. "My fellow soldiers," he began in his mock-human voice, "today we face our greatest challenge. The odds are against us, but we have something the enemy does not have. We have the human spirit." The audience of alien soldiers roared with laughter. Several others had started recording the performance with their personal devices, planning to share it with friends later. "We may be outnumbered 10-1, Crix continued, really getting into his role now, but one human warrior is worth 10 of any enemy. We will show them what it means to face the fury of Earth's finest soldiers." Zara had been watching the performance with growing amusement. As an intelligence officer, she had access to detailed psychological profiles of human soldiers, and the mockery was hitting very close to actual human behavior patterns she had observed. "The accuracy is remarkable," she said, loud enough for others to hear. "I have read reports of human commanders actually giving speeches almost exactly like that before major operations." "Really?" asked a Corvan soldier at a nearby table. Species resembled large bears with blue fur and enhanced senses. "They actually say things like that with a straight face." "Oh yes," Zara replied, accessing her data files through her neural implant. "According to my records, human military doctrine includes something called morale speeches that are supposed to inspire soldiers to fight harder. The speeches almost always include references to honor, duty, sacrifice, and the special nature of human fighting spirit." Thane had climbed onto his own chair and was now joining Crix's performance. "But wait, there is more," he announced. "After the inspiring speech, the human hero must face the enemy alone, while his comrades are somehow unable to help." "Yes," Crix agreed, pointing dramatically at an imaginary enemy. "The bridge is destroyed, or there is only one spacesuit, or the door can only be opened from the inside. So the human hero must sacrifice himself to save everyone else." The two aliens began acting out an elaborate death scene, with Thane pretending to be mortally wounded while Crix held him in his arms. "Tell my wife I love her," Thane gasped in his fake human voice. "Tell her that I died for something that mattered." "I will never forget your sacrifice," Crix replied solemnly. "Your heroic death has inspired us all to fight harder, and we will defeat the enemy in your honor." The recreation room erupted in applause and laughter. Even soldiers from species that were normally serious and reserved were finding the performance highly entertaining. Vila had been analyzing the humor, patterns, and social dynamics of the situation. "What I find most interesting," she said, her musical voice carrying over the noise, "is that humans seem to genuinely believe these scenarios are realistic. They treat individual heroism as if it were a viable military strategy." "That is because they are desperate," suggested a Thraxian soldier. His people were known for their logical thinking and advanced technology. Humans know they are physically inferior to most other species, so they create these fantasies to compensate for their weakness. Lieutenant Zara nodded in agreement. My analysis of human psychological profiles supports that theory. They exhibit what we might call delusions of grandeur as a species-wide defense mechanism. It makes sense, Thane said, finally climbing down from his chair. When you are weak, you must convince yourself that you are actually strong. Otherwise, the reality of your situation becomes too depressing to bear. The conversation was becoming more analytical now, with various alien species contributing their observations about human behavior. A Nexian soldier, whose people resembled tall, thin, gray-skinned humanoids, spoke up from the back of the room. I have served alongside humans for 3 years, he said in his soft, whispering voice. They often speak of their ancestors with what seems like religious reverence. They mention names like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, as if these individuals were more than just ordinary political leaders. Same with their military heroes, added a Zephyrian, who had recently joined the coalition forces. They speak of soldiers like Patton and MacArthur as if they were tactical geniuses, when their strategies were actually quite primitive by modern standards. Crix had finally sobered up enough to sit back down, though he was still grinning widely at the success of his performance. The really amusing part is how they apply this heroic thinking to current situations. I have heard human soldiers talking about how they would handle various tactical scenarios, and they always assumed they would be the hero of the story. It is a form of mental illness, Vela suggested. An ability to perceive reality accurately. Due to emotional needs and cultural conditioning, several aliens nodded in agreement. The idea that humans suffered from species-wide psychological problems seemed to make sense of many behaviors they had observed. Speaking of humans, Thane said, looking around the room, I see we have one right here with us tonight. For the first time, the group of aliens noticed Colonel Frank Davis sitting quietly in his corner booth. The older human had been so still and quiet that they had not paid attention to him before. Perfect, Crix said, his forearms gesturing toward Davis. We can get a human perspective on this discussion. The aliens turned their attention toward the colonel, their expressions showing a mixture of amusement and curiosity.
They'd been
having such a good time mocking human mythology that they wanted to include an actual human in the conversation. Colonel Davis, Crix called out, his voice still carrying traces of the mock-heroic tone he had been using. You have been listening to our discussion? Surely you can settle this debate for us. Davis looked up from his drink, his weathered face showing no particular expression. The scars on his face caught the light, evidence of old battles and hard-won experience. We want to know the truth about these human hero stories, Thane added, his reptilian features showing genuine curiosity. Are they just entertainment, or do humans actually believe this mythology? The recreation room had grown quieter as more soldiers became aware of the confrontation developing between the alien mockers and the lone human officer. Davis set his drink down slowly and looked at the group of aliens who had been making fun of his species for the past 2 hours. Which stories would you like me to explain? Davis asked in a quiet, measured voice that somehow carried clearly across the room despite its low volume. The recreation room fell completely silent. Every alien soldier stopped talking and turned to look at Colonel Frank Davis. The older human sat perfectly still in his corner booth, his gray eyes studying the group of aliens who had been mocking his species for the past 2 hours. Davis slowly stood up from his seat. He was not particularly tall or impressive looking, but something about his movement made the room feel smaller. The casual atmosphere of celebration and mockery suddenly felt heavy and serious. You want to know about human stories? Davis said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silent room. Let me tell you about Lieutenant Commander Pete Johnson. The aliens looked at each other uncertainly. They had expected Davis to either join in their jokes or defend human mythology in an emotional way. Instead, he sounded like he was beginning a military briefing. 3 years ago, during the siege of Kepler Station, Davis continued, walking slowly toward their table, Lieutenant Commander. Johnson was part of a reconnaissance unit sent to gather intelligence on Zephyrian troop movements. Crix shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The Zentarian warrior suddenly felt less confident than he had moments before. Colonel, we were just having some fun. We did not mean any serious offense. Davis looked at Crix with those steady gray eyes. Johnson's unit consisted of 12 soldiers. They were discovered by a Zephyrian patrol and came under heavy fire. Within 10 minutes, 11 of those soldiers were dead. The colonel's voice remained calm and factual, but every alien in the room was now listening intently. Something about his tone suggested this was not going to be a typical story. Johnson was wounded in the leg and trapped in a damaged communications bunker. Davis went on. The Zephyrians had him surrounded. He had one sidearm with maybe 20 rounds of ammunition. The enemy battalion had over 300 soldiers. Thane's reptilian features showed confusion. What happened to him? Did he surrender? No, Davis said simply. He held that position for 6 hours and 17 minutes. When coalition reinforcements finally arrived, they found Johnson still alive and the Zephyrian battalion in full retreat. Vila's crystalline form flickered with uncertainty. That is impossible. One soldier cannot hold off an entire battalion. Davis reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. He activated it, and a holographic display appeared above their table. The display showed an official coalition military report with Johnson's photograph and service record. Johnson did not win through superior firepower, Davis explained, highlighting sections of the report. He won through tactical intelligence and absolute determination. He used the bunker's communication equipment to coordinate artillery strikes from ships in orbit. He provided targeting data for 6 hours while under constant enemy fire. The aliens stared at the official documentation. This was not mythology or entertainment. This was a verified military record. But why did he not surrender when his position became hopeless? Asked Sarah, her intelligence training making her focus on the tactical details. Because Johnson knew that the information in that bunker would allow the Zephyrians to break through coalition defenses at 3 other points. Davis replied. If he surrendered, thousands of coalition soldiers would die, and the entire sector would fall. Davis moved to the next section of the report. Emmy offered him safe passage if he would abandon his position. Haven offered to treat his wounds and return him to coalition space. Johnson's response was to call in another artillery. Strike on his own position. The room remained silent as the aliens processed this information. What Davis was describing did not sound like the fantasy heroism they had been mocking. It sounded like documented military history. Let me tell you about Sergeant Amy Foster, Davis continued, changing the holographic display to show another service record. 6 months ago, during the evacuation of Proxima 7, her transport ship was shot down behind enemy lines. The display showed the wreckage of a coalition transport vessel and the surrounding battlefield. Foster was the only soldier who was not seriously injured in the crash. 47 other soldiers were wounded and unable to move. The enemy was closing in fast. Crix found his voice again. What did she do? Foster made 17 separate trips across open ground under heavy enemy fire, Davis answered. She carried each wounded soldier to a defensive position near a cave system. When she ran out of ammunition, she used enemy weapons taken from dead Zephyrian soldiers. The holographic display showed Foster's route across the battlefield marked with enemy positions and fire zones. The aliens could see that she had moved through areas that should have been certain death. Foster held that position for 11 hours, Davis continued. She treated wounded soldiers, coordinated with rescue teams, and fought off 6 separate enemy assaults. When coalition forces finally reached her position, all 47 wounded soldiers were still alive. Thane shook his head slowly. Is such a thing possible? The odds against survival were enormous. Foster succeeded because she refused to accept that those soldiers were going to die, Davis replied. When conventional tactics failed, she invented new ones. When her equipment broke, she improvised replacements. When the situation became impossible, she changed what impossible meant. Davis paused and looked around the room at all the alien faces staring at him. You have been sitting here tonight, mocking what you think are human fantasies. But you have misunderstood what you were hearing. He activated another section of his device, and the holographic display changed to show his own service record. The aliens could see mission after mission, battle after battle, stretching back over 30 years of military service. The miracle of Luna Base, Davis said, pointing to one entry. 12 coalition soldiers against a full Zephyrian division. We held the position and won. Vila's musical voice was barely a whisper. How many enemies? 4,312, Davis answered without hesitation. We had superior defensive positions, and we knew the terrain. More importantly, we knew what would happen if we lost. The display showed tactical maps and battle reports from Luna Base. Every alien in the room could see that this was not mythology. This was documented military history with verified casualty reports and strategic analysis. The defense of New Harmony, Davis continued, moving to another section of his record. Coalition Command considered evacuating the entire colony because we could not match enemy numbers. Suggested an alternative strategy. What kind of strategy? Zara, her intelligence training making her desperately curious about the tactical details. We made the enemy think we had forces we did not actually have, Davis explained. We used deception, misdirection, and careful timing to convince them they were facing a much larger coalition fleet. The enemy retreated without realizing they outnumbered us 5-1. Davis looked directly at Crix, who had started the evening's mockery. You asked me about human mythology? These are not myths. These are operational reports. These are training. Examples. These are the standards we expect from ourselves. The Zentarian warrior's forearms trembled slightly as he stared at the official documentation floating above the table. But these are extraordinary achievements. They cannot be normal. Human behavior? That is where you are wrong, Davis said, his voice growing stronger. These achievements are exactly what normal human behavior looks like when everything goes wrong, when the odds are impossible, when surrender is the logical choice. He gestured to the holographic displays showing dozens of similar reports. Every human child grows up hearing these stories, not as entertainment, but as examples of what humans do when faced with impossible situations. Davis looked around the room one more time, meeting the eyes of every alien who had been laughing at human stories just an hour earlier. You mistake our stories for mythology because you have never been in a situation where being extraordinary was the only way to survive. The colonel deactivated his device, and the holographic displays disappeared. The reason human stories sound so impossible to you is because your species have never needed to make the impossible happen just to stay alive. He turned to walk back to his corner booth, leaving the alien soldiers sitting in stunned silence as they began to understand that what they had interpreted as human weakness was actually something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Colonel Davis did not return to his corner booth. Instead, he remained standing near the alien soldiers' table, watching their faces as they tried to process what he had just told them. The recreation room stayed completely silent, except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. Crix was the first to find his voice, though it came out much quieter than before. Colonel, these reports you showed us, are they all verified by Coalition Command? Every single one, Davis replied. Would you like to see more examples? He reactivated his device without waiting for an answer. The holographic display showed a new service record, this one belonging to Captain Steve Murphy. The aliens recognized the name immediately. But Captain Murphy works in supply logistics, Vela said, her crystalline form flickering with confusion. He processes equipment requests and inventory reports. Davis nodded. That is his current assignment, yes. But before that, Captain Murphy was the sole survivor of the lost fleet of Andromeda. The aliens looked at each other with growing alarm. The lost fleet was legendary throughout the Coalition. 12 ships had disappeared into unexplored space 3 years ago while pursuing a Zephyrian raiding force. Only one ship had ever returned. Murphy piloted a crippled destroyer through hostile space for 8 months, Davis continued, showing trajectory maps and survival logs. His ship had no faster-than-light capability, limited life support, and enemy forces hunting him constantly. Thane's reptilian eyes widened as he studied the displayed information. 8 months in a damaged ship? How did he survive? Murphy cannibalized parts from destroyed sections of his ship to keep life support running, Davis explained. He rationed food and water to make supplies last longer than should have been possible. When enemy ships found him, he used debris fields and asteroid belts to hide. The display showed Murphy's route through space, marked with enemy patrol zones and the locations where he had hidden his damaged ship. It looked like an impossible journey through certain death.
Yes.
But that is not the remarkable part, Davis said, changing the display again. The remarkable part is what Murphy did when he finally reached Coalition space. What do you mean? Asked Zara, her intelligence training, making her focus on every detail. Murphy's ship was carrying critical intelligence about Zephyrian fleet. Movements and base locations, Davis answered. Information that the Coalition desperately needed to plan defensive strategies. The holographic display showed star charts and enemy position reports that Murphy had gathered during his 8-month journey. The aliens could see that this intelligence had been crucial to several Coalition victories. Murphy could have sent this information by radio transmission as soon as he reached the edge of Coalition space, Davis continued. But radio transmissions can be intercepted by enemy forces. So he chose to deliver the intelligence personally. That seems like a reasonable decision, Vela observed. Even though it meant traveling through 3 more star systems where enemy forces were operating, Davis added. Even though his ship was barely functional and could break down at any moment, Murphy chose to risk his life for 3 more weeks to ensure the intelligence reached Coalition command safely. At the service record in silence? What Davis was describing was not the behavior of a support officer who processed supply requests. This was the behavior of someone who had faced impossible odds and refused to give up. Let me show you another example, Davis said, changing the display to show Dr. Helen Carter's medical record. Dr. Carter, Crix asked in disbelief. The quiet, human doctor who works in Medical Bay 7? It's the same Dr. Carter who once performed surgery on herself while trapped behind enemy lines? Davis confirmed. The holographic display showed a medical emergency report from the Battle of Vega Prime. Dr. Carter had been part of a field medical team when their position was overrun by enemy forces. Carter was shot in the abdomen and trapped in a collapsed medical bunker, Davis explained. She was alone, wounded, and surrounded by 30 Coalition soldiers who would die without medical treatment. The display showed the layout of the collapsed bunker and the positions of the wounded soldiers. Medical scanners had recorded everything that happened during the next 14 hours. Carter used a broken mirror and medical instruments to perform abdominal surgery on herself, Davis continued. She removed the bullet and repaired internal damage while remaining conscious to treat the other wounded soldiers. Thanes clawed. Hands gripped the edge of the table. She operated on herself, while treating other patients. For 14 hours, Davis confirmed, Carter saved the lives of all 30 soldiers in that bunker. When Coalition forces finally reached them, she was still working, even though she had lost massive amounts of blood. The aliens looked at the medical records in stunned silence. Every detail was documented by automated medical scanners and verified by multiple witnesses. You see, Davis said, his voice growing stronger as he continued, you have been sitting here tonight laughing at what you thought were human fantasies. But you have been surrounded by these people your entire service with the Coalition. Gestured toward the other areas of the ship. Jake Morrison, whom you mentioned earlier, held off an enemy boarding party single-handed for 40 minutes during the Battle of Rigel Station. Lisa Rodriguez coordinated evacuation efforts that saved 8,000 civilians when the colony on Kepler 4 came under attack. Davis activated his device again, and the holographic display showed a long list of names and service records. Every name belonged to a human currently serving on the Nexus Prime. Chief Engineer Bobby Clark designed and built the modifications that allow this ship to outrun enemy vessels twice our size, Davis continued. Communications Officer Mary Johnson developed the encryption codes that keep our battle plans secret from enemy intelligence. The list kept growing as Davis scrolled through the records. Dozens of humans serving in what the aliens had considered support roles, each with documented achievements that would be considered extraordinary by any species. You want to know why humans tell these stories? Davis said, looking around the room at all the alien faces staring at him. We tell them because they remind us who we are. They remind us what we are capable of when everything goes wrong. Vila's musical voice was barely audible. But these achievements are so far beyond normal expectations. How can an entire species perform at such levels? Because we have to, Davis answered simply. Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the fastest or the smartest, or the most technologically advanced. We do not have natural armor, or multiple arms, or enhanced senses. He paused and looked directly at each alien at the table. What we have is the ability to look at an impossible situation and refuse to accept defeat. When logic says we should surrender, we find a way to win anyway. Davis changed the display one more time, showing his own complete service record. The aliens could see 30 years of impossible missions, desperate battles, and victories that should not have been possible. The miracle of Luna Bays was not a miracle, Davis said. It was 12 humans who refused to let 4,000 enemies take a strategic position. The defense of New Harmony was not luck. It was careful planning and the willingness to risk everything on a strategy that should not have worked. Looked around the recreation room, noting how many other coalition soldiers had stopped their own conversations to listen. The breaking of the siege lines at Vega Prime was not a fantasy. It was the result of analyzing an impossible situation. Until we found the 1% chance of victory that everyone else had missed. He deactivated his device, and the holographic displays disappeared. You asked me to explain human mythology? These are not myths. These are operational procedures. This is how humans respond when faced with certain defeat. Davis finally turned to walk back to his corner booth, but before he reached it, Crix called out to him. Colonel, the Zentarian warrior said, his forearms trembling slightly. What happens when humans face a situation that truly cannot be one? When there is no possible way to achieve victory? Davis stopped and looked back at the group of aliens, who had spent the evening mocking his species. A slight smile appeared on his weathered face for the first time that night. Then we change what victory means, he said quietly, and continued walking to his seat. The recreation room remained silent for several long minutes after Colonel Davis returned to his corner booth. The alien soldiers sat around their table, staring at their drinks and trying to understand what they had just learned. The celebration that had started the evening felt like it had happened days ago instead of ours. Crix was the first to move. The Zentarian warrior slowly stood up and walked over to where Davis sat quietly finishing his drink. The colonel looked up as the massive alien approached his table. Colonel Crix said, his voice much different than the loud, mocking tone he had used earlier. I owe you an apology. We all do. Davis studied the alien's face for a moment. No apology needed, soldier. You were having fun after a successful mission. That is normal and healthy. But we were wrong about humans, Crix continued. We thought. Your stories were just fantasies to make yourselves feel better about being weak. And what do you think now? Davis asked. Crix looked back at his friends, then returned his attention to the colonel. Now I think we are the ones who do not understand what real strength means. One by one, the other aliens joined Crix at Davis's table. Vila's crystalline form moved with careful grace, her usual sparkling reduced to a dim glow that suggested embarrassment. Thane followed, his reptilian features showing genuine respect for the first time that evening. Colonel Davis Vela said, her musical voice much softer than before, may I ask you something that has been troubling me? Of course. Why do humans not talk about these achievements more openly? When other species share stories of their great warriors, they boast and celebrate. But humans seem to treat extraordinary accomplishments as if they were ordinary. Davis considered the question carefully. Because to us, they are ordinary. Every species has natural advantages. Zentarians like Crix have 4 arms and enhanced strength. Quartzians like you have perfect memory and logical thinking. Saurids like Thane have natural armor and predator instincts. He paused to take a sip of his drink. Humans have something different. We have the ability to look at any situation and say, I refuse to accept this outcome. Then we find a way to make that refusal work. But surely not every human can perform such incredible feats, Thane said. The achievements you showed us tonight would be impossible for most individuals of any species. You are missing the point, Davis replied. Those achievements are not the result of special individuals. They are the result of ordinary humans placed in extraordinary circumstances. Zara had been accessing her intelligence files while listening to the conversation. "Colonel, I have been reviewing Coalition military records. The pattern you describe appears throughout human history, going back centuries before first contact with other species." "That is correct," Davis confirmed. "Humans have been doing impossible things for thousands of years, long before we knew other intelligent species existed. Can you give us an example?" Bella asked. Davis thought for a moment. During one of Earth's ancient wars, a human soldier named Audie Murphy climbed onto a burning tank destroyer and used its machine gun to hold off an entire company of enemy soldiers. He was wounded and outnumbered 50-1. "What happened?" Crix asked. "Murphy held his position for an hour until reinforcements arrived. He single-handedly stopped an enemy advance that would have broken through Allied lines." The aliens looked at each other with growing understanding, and this was before humans had advanced technology or knew about other species, Thane observed. "Exactly," Davis said. "Humans were doing these things when our most advanced weapons were chemical explosives and metal projectiles. We have been refusing to accept defeat for our entire recorded history." Lieutenant Zara accessed more historical files. "I am finding similar patterns throughout human military history. Individuals facing impossible odds and somehow achieving victory through determination and tactical innovation." "Now you are beginning to understand," Davis said. "What you have been calling mythology is actually documentation. These stories do not create heroes. They remind us what we already are." A new voice joined the conversation. "May I sit with you?" Turned to see Captain Steve Murphy approaching the table, the quiet supply officer who had been revealed as the sole survivor of the lost fleet. "Of course, Captain," Davis said, making room at the table. Murphy sat down and looked around at the group of aliens. "I heard some of what you were discussing. I hope my service record was not too much of a shock." Crix stared at the human who had seemed so ordinary just hours before. "Captain Murphy, how do you do it? How do you go from surviving 8 months in hostile space to processing supply requests like it was nothing?" Murphy shrugged. "Because it is nothing special. Every human on this ship has similar experiences. We do what needs to be done, then we move on to the next job." "But surely you must take pride in such extraordinary accomplishments," Vela said. "I take pride in doing my duty," Murphy replied. "The supply department keeps this ship running. It is important work. The fact that I once had to navigate through enemy space is just part of my background." Thane shook his head in amazement. "Your species treats legendary achievements as routine job qualifications, because they are routine," Davis said. "Every human grows up knowing that someday they might face a situation where being extraordinary is the only way to survive. We prepare for that possibility our entire lives." Dr. Helen Carter appeared at their table, having finished her shift in the medical bay. "Mind if I join this discussion? I understand my surgical procedures have become a topic of conversation." Aliens made room for the quiet doctor who had performed surgery on herself while treating 30 wounded soldiers. She sat down as if nothing unusual had happened. Dr. Crix said carefully, "When you were trapped in that collapsed bunker, what made you decide to operate on yourself instead of waiting for rescue?" "Waiting was not an option," Carter replied matter-of-factly. 30 soldiers needed medical treatment immediately. I was the only doctor available. The logical choice was to fix my own injuries so I could help them." "But the risk to yourself was enormous," Vela pointed out. "The risk to them was worse," Carter said simply. "Doctors take an oath to do no harm and to preserve life. That oath does not include exceptions for personal convenience." The aliens sat in stunned silence as they realized they were now surrounded by humans whose casual conversation included references to legendary achievements and life or death. Decisions made without hesitation. "This is what I meant earlier," Davis said to the group. "Humans do not see these actions as special because they represent our normal response to crisis situations. Every human child learns that when everything goes wrong, you find a way to make it right." Jake Morrison and Lisa Rodriguez entered the recreation room, finally joining the post-battle celebration. They approached the table where their human colleagues sat with the alien soldiers. "Sorry we are late," Jake said. We were helping with damage assessment reports. No problem, Davis replied. We were just having a discussion about human military traditions. Lisa looked around at the serious expressions on the alien faces. Did we miss something important? I think our alien friends have gained a new understanding of human nature, Murphy said with a slight smile. Crick stood up slowly, followed by the other aliens. Colonel Davis, Captain Murphy, Dr. Carter, all of you. We want to formally apologize. For our behavior tonight, no apology necessary, Davis said again. Yes, there is, Vela insisted, her crystalline form glowing with sincerity. We mocked what we thought were fantasies, but we were actually mocking the documented history of your people. Thane stepped forward. We understand now why humans hold leadership positions throughout the coalition, despite being one of the newer species to join. Why is that? Carter asked, with genuine curiosity. Because you do not just fight battles, Thane replied. You fight the concept of losing itself. The aliens began to leave the table, each stopping to offer personal apologies and expressions of respect to the humans present. As they walked away, Davis could hear them talking quietly among themselves about requesting access to complete human military history files. Davis finished his drink and prepared to return to his quarters. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new, impossible situations that would require human solutions. As he stood to leave, Jake Morrison asked, Colonel, what was that all about? Davis looked at his fellow humans, all of whom seemed genuinely puzzled by the aliens' change in attitude. Just some friends learning that human stories are not stories at all, Davis replied. They are promises. He walked toward the exit, pausing at the door to send a message to his daughter back on Earth. The final lines read, The universe is vast and full of wonder, sweetheart. But it has not met anything quite like us yet.